Welcome to the Loaded Goat. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Chris.
Christopher, I want to thank you for being flexible with recording today. We are running up on schedule for getting this up, and I had tickets tonight to go see Cocaine Bear. So I appreciate you working with me.
Oh man, I try to convince my friends to all fly to Salt Lake City so we could watch Cocaine Bear together.
Why Salt Lake City?
That would be a good mutual meeting point. Delta Hub.
Yeah, I guess that's easier than all of them coming to Helena.
Yeah, definitely. Are you excited? What do you think it's going to be?
I'm curious. I mean, it seems. It did take place in the Appalachian Mountains, they say, and I'm curious to see just the whole story. I mean, I know it's inspired by a true story. It's not based on a true story, but seems like it could be quite entertaining.
I am comfortable saying that this is the third in a series of movies, and it joins the ilk of Snakes on a Plane.
Oh yeah.
Sharknado, and then now Cocaine Bear.
I have not seen Sharknado. I have seen Snakes on a Plane.
I haven't seen Sharknado either.
Yeah. Snakes on a Plane was quite entertaining.
I did actually kind of like it.
I thought it was pretty funny. Yeah. Yes. So let's dive in. Well, actually, before we dive in today on my fair Ernest T. Bass, my mother explained to me what a mustache cup was.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So basically, it was a mug that it had like a protection if you were a covering, so if you were drinking, you could drink from it, but there was a protection for your mustache so it wouldn't get a bunch of stuff in it.
Oh, strange. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That was back in the period where mustaches were pretty popular. I know you have sported a mustache at one point or another.
Of course I have.
Yeah.
Is that very good? Have you?
I've done the goatee and I've done the beard. I've never just done the mustache, except for just having fun when I'm shaving the beard off to see what I'd look like with a mustache.
Well, new frontiers ahead of you.
Maybe so. So you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
All right. So production on this episode began on November 21st, 1963. So the cast was informed of the Kennedy assassination during production.
That's a good tidbit.
Yeah, but they ended up as upset as they were, they ended up just having to push through and get the show done.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah. All right.
The episode itself.
That explains why Lyndon Johnson isn't in this episode either.
He was busy.
Yeah.
He couldn't take away otherwise he would have been a shoo-in to be in this episode at the party.
He loves the singles night.
Yeah, so that's what they say. So this episode ended up airing on February 3rd, 1964. It is written by Jim Fritzell and Everett Greenbaum.
Question here.
Yeah.
Did they ever not write together? Like, was Fritzell ever with Bullock?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just thought of that last night. I thought I'd inquire.
Randy Turner could tell you probably that right off the top of his head, but I don't know for sure.
Cool.
So, and obviously it's a play on My Fair Lady, which was a big time musical in the early 1960s. I mean, it had a revival on Broadway not too long ago. It won the Tony in 1957 and is, of course, based on the earlier play Pygmalion. I'm sure that was not lost on you, Christopher.
No, never. Totally know everything about Pygmalion.
I'm talking about My Fair Lady. The fact that they called it My Fair Ernest T. Bass, you knew that it was a play on My Fair Lady, I assume, right?
I did. I didn't. I got to be honest. I didn't put much thought into that, but now that you say it, I understand the reference.
Yeah, which will come up.
It's like a half. It's like a halfway there,
Which will come up here in just a second when we get to another line in the series. But we open with Ernest T. Bass throwing a rock through a window. And it looks like he's throwing a window to a nice house. It's an unusual start to the episode. I mean, it's just kind of a close-up of Ernest T. Bass with a rock before he chucks it through the window.
Straight hooliganism.
And we cut to Miss Wiley telling Andy and Barney that he came in the house, raised Cain, and did things like eat watermelon rinds and stick his dirty hand in the punch bowl.
And giggle.
Which is a staple of Ernest T. Bass. Miss Wiley is played by Doris Packer, who is best remembered for playing the principal on Leave It to Beaver. Turns out Mr. Schwamp tried to stop him. Mr. Schwamp is just a goofy-looking guy who shows up here and there in a lot of episodes, but this is the first time we see him.
The only way to stop a bad Ernest T. Bass with an Ernest T. Bat with a watermelon rind is a swamp with a watermelon rind.
Uh-huh. I appreciate the effort. It turns out, as usual, Ernest T. Bass is looking for a woman. But they don't. But Andy and Barney don't know it's Ernest T. Bass, or at least Barney doesn't, because they bring the rock to Barney, and he is upset that they all handled it, because he says it's now going to make things tough for them at the lab. Not sure what lab they're talking about, but then Andy goes, "Barney, it's Ernest T. Bass. Everybody knows."
I like this.
Yeah. So Barney starts to leave. They try to give him the rock, which drops on the ground, and Barney picks it up with a handkerchief.
Ever so delicately.
Ever so delicately. And then Andy and Barney pull up to the jail, and they can't find Ernest T. Bass anywhere. Barney starts quoting about the psychology of Ernest T. Bass, and Andy says, "You've been reading again, ain't you?" And it turns out he has checked out a book from the library. But Barney says that he wouldn't touch Ernest T.'s id with a 10-foot pole.
I like this part.
I did too. And so they go inside and they find that Ernest T. Bass has put himself into jail, and he's looking for a girl. And they referenced the last time in town that they gave him Barney's uniform, but apparently it didn't work out, so he brought it back. This is a rare moment of a callback to a previous episode.
Yeah, and Ernest T. puts off some weird vibes.
As Barney Fife once said, "I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man on earth."
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So, and then this is just a funny little story. He courted Hog Winslow's daughter, Hoggette, and he tied a note to a rock, threw it through a window, but it hit her in the head. And she's now going to marry the taxidermist who sewed up her head.
And 7 stitches, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Hoggette. That's a great name for a daughter.
It really is.
Yeah.
Deep creativity.
Yeah. Well, it's just, with a guy's named Hog Wilson, I mean, the best name for the daughter for a good laugh is Hoggette.
Yeah, totally.
And Andy decided at this point he's going to try to clean Ernest T. up, and they bring him over to the Taylor household for dinner. And of course, Ernest T. has no table manners. He throws bread. He doesn't even know how to appropriately pass the potatoes. And so it's just a disaster.
He is really good at picking up like 12 potatoes at a time.
That's pretty impressive.
Way too many potatoes for 4 people.
I mean, I look at that many potatoes. I'm like, what are you going to do with all those potatoes?
Heavy Idaho vibes.
Yeah. Well, later, Barney comes over to check on Andy, and it turns out Ernest T. is upstairs cleaning up. And Andy says he's going to keep working with Ernest T. and pass him off to Miss Wiley as a gentleman. And just then, Ernest T. runs down the stairs and jumps over the banister into a chair. And Barney says, "For a minute there, I thought it was the Count of Monte Cristo," which is it's nice Barney can get a singer in here and there.
Well, he's been reading books, going to the library.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Andy goes to him to explain that there's a proper way to enter a room, and Barney refuses to show him how, but then Andy butters him up, and Barney volunteers to show him, and he knocks on the door, and he walks in and works the room in a way I've never walked in a place and worked the room like that. I imagine you have.
I have, but I had feedback on Barney. It was a little fast.
Yeah.
I had anxiety watching him move from one to the other. If you're going to move that quickly, you're doing more points, looks, waves. You're not shaking and saying hi to everybody. It's more walk pasts type situations.
Yeah. I knew this guy. He was a funny guy back in college, and he did that once at a party. He didn't know anybody. He just kept walking up going, "Hey, how you doing? Hey." And he finally gets to me, and he knows me, and he gives me a big hug. The guy was just kind of a hoot.
That's excellent.
Yeah. So the next day at the jail, Andy has Ernest T. practicing saying, "How do you do, Mrs. Wiley?" And it just keeps going over, and he basically says, "I'm going to work with you,
Mrs. Wiley."
Yeah.
Very nasally.
Very nasally. And then we just go to commercial. There's not much drama as we go to commercial. It's like it's either going to work or it's not.
Yeah. Should we do our top 5 favorite moments from My Fair Lady?
I mean,
I don't have any.
I mean, the rain in Spain goes quickly down the drain. That's about all I got.
Ding, ding, ding.
I was thinking, though, some great pet names if we were talking about Andy Griffith characters. Ernest T. Bass would be a great character name.
Great name for a fish.
It's a great name for a fish. I guess if you get a pot-bellied pig, you could name it Hoggette.
You could name it Hoggette. If you have like a purple dinosaur, you can name it Barney.
Now you're not being creative at all.
Now I'm just being silly.
You're just being silly. I just was thinking like but there are some fun names you could do. Ernest T. Bass, though, that would be a good fish name.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't get a bass.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah. So after the break, Ernest T. comes down the stairs in a suit, and he's looking very good, like a 1930s gangster, which is funny because Howard Morris is from the Bronx. So he's probably not saying he's comfortable being a gangster, but he's comfortable dressing more like a New Yorker in a suit and a hat than he probably is dressing like Ernest T. Bass.
Yeah, he looks good. He looks like my friend Elliot.
Shout out to Elliot. And he's looking sharp, but it's clear he can't improvise. And they're going to take him over to Miss Wiley's and pass him off as Andy's cousin from Raleigh. And Barney says, if you wrote this into a play, nobody would
believe it.
And that's the shout out to My Fair Lady.
I like it.
Yeah.
I would have missed all that. I would have missed that.
After the gathering, it is clear that Mrs. Wiley doesn't know who he is. She really wants to chat with this disguised Ernest T.
Well, he's a new bachelor about town.
He is a new bachelor about that town. And at that point, Ernest T starts speaking in his normal voice, and she becomes suspicious. And then Andy is chatting with Ramona, who's kind of an awkward person when Barney walks in. And Ramona is played by Jackie Joseph, who was in some other television shows like the Doris Day Show in the 70s. But have you seen Gremlins 1 or Gremlins 2?
No, but I feel like I'm living Gremlins 3 right now.
Why?
I was making a joke about you.
About me?
Yeah.
You obviously haven't seen Gremlins. I'm much more pleasant than any of those Gremlins. But she plays, for those who've seen Gremlins 1 and Gremlins 2, she plays Mrs. Futterman. And then Miss Wiley then pulls Andy aside and says that she realizes he's not from Raleigh. It actually turns out she thinks he's from Boston, which is a throwback. Back Bay, Boston, which is a throwback to a scene in My Fair Lady as well.
And The Departed.
What, because of the two accents, or because
every neighborhood's covered in The Departed.
Yeah. John Hancock, is that an actual neighborhood in Boston?
There's the John Hancock building.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know, actually. I'm thinking, I don't know. There's the Prudential building, and John Hancock wasn't very prudent. So maybe that's an ironic statement. Well,
because they bury that guy, and they don't do a good job burying him in the marsh. And so they said, you got to bury him in the marsh so a guy who's going down to John Hancock doesn't find him. And I'm just kind of like, maybe it's the John, I don't know. I don't know what they're saying.
Yeah, I don't know either. We'll have to do a site visit.
That would make sense. To go to Massachusetts to do an episode of The Loaded Goat. That's a great idea.
I agree.
All right. So Ernest T walks up, and Andy and Barney tell him to ask Ramona to dance, and he walks over and does.
He asks if he has the rhythm right, which I do appreciate.
Yeah.
Sets his metronome.
Yeah.
His internal metronome.
And then he dances her outside, and he tells her how strong he is, and then he picks her up.
It was kind of cute. It was a little freaky when he took her outside, but it ended up being a nice little moment.
I mean, I think it ended up being a little freaky because every story you've heard so many stories where this ends up just being an awful experience for someone, where we were dancing and then he took me outside, and then,
yeah.
But this was not that, obviously, not to be seen on the Andy Griffith Show. All he does is pick her up. And then Miss Wiley calls Ramona in to make an announcement. They are going to do a tag dance. Ernest T and Ramona tag each other, and they dance before some guy comes along and tags Ernest T out. And when he goes to tag back in, the man keeps ignoring him.
Well, are there no tag backs?
I don't know. I don't know what the rule of a tag dance is. I've never participated in a tag dance.
Yeah.
You?
No, I have not.
But I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's extreme. I don't condone taking a flower pot and smashing it over a guy's head for ignoring you. But the way that guy was treating Ernest T, I could sympathize.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And clearly, as we learned, he wasn't overstepping. Ramona was fine with it.
She's fine with it right after he does it. He picks her up and she's having a great time. Miss Wiley, on the other hand, is not happy. She realizes who she is and she kicks him out, and Andy and Barney drag him out, and they're like, this went terribly. But then Ramona
It's a funny drag out. Like Ernest is wrapping his legs around theirs. I feel like it was probably pretty silly to do.
I would imagine it was. And then, but, just as they're about to say, well, this didn't work out, Ramona chases him down, and it turns out she really likes him, and they run around the area like maniacs.
Yeah,
and we go to commercial.
Singing in the rain, hitting poles, jumping over stumps. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love is love.
Yeah, it's there's somebody. I mean, obviously, Andy says there's somebody for everybody. Ramona is a little wacky.
This scene reminded me of the end of Grease, when Danny tries to become like Sandy and Sandy tries to become like Danny, and then they realize they both like each other, who they were. This is exactly what that was. We just need to hear the Ramona precursor.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is I feel like, Ramona is asking about the weather throughout the whole early parts, because Ramona is like, she's trying to fit in.
Yeah. I did really like that line when he was like, it rained last week. He's like, yeah, I was in it.
I'm like, I'll bet you were. So in the epilogue, Barney is perplexed that Ramona would run off with Ernest T. Apparently, her family is a fine makes good charcoal in town and is respected. But it turns out that she's the granddaughter of Rotten Roy Akram, who burned the town down in 1870. So there you go.
That's such a good origin story for a tycoon family.
They burned the town down and
they're like, well, rags to riches. Here's the charcoal.
I got to be honest with you. That's kind of like, I'm not really a big line in the sand. There are some companies I'll try to avoid buying from. But if you burn down my town, I'm probably not going to I'm going to make a point to not do business with you.
I would agree with that as well.
Yeah. So they close with Andy once again saying, if you wrote this into a play, nobody'd believe it.
I like it. It's funny.
Yeah.
It's good. They tie it all together.
Yeah.
It's an atypical format. I think. Is that fair to say?
I think so.
Yeah, it's fun. Starts different, ends different. I enjoy it.
And it ties back in with something going on in pop culture at the time.
Yeah, which is crazy that My Fair Lady was ever in pop culture.
It was, though.
I know. It's so old.
I don't know if the term pop culture was around in 1964.
I think it started the day Andy Warhol started doing prints.
You think?
Yeah.
You probably looked this up.
I did, of course. I'm very well researched.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's no shame in the notes you bring to this podcast. It's all top notch and research to a T.
Couldn't agree more. What's your rating?
I think I'll give this an 8.
I'm thinking 7.
Yeah.
Just because I'm still skeptical of the character of Ernest T. Bass in general. But I liked his willingness to learn in this episode.
What's your beef with Ernest T. Bass? Do you think he's just kind of not redeemable?
I think he's a creep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any fixing Ernest T. Bass up.
I would agree with that.
I think Ernest T. Bass fits the you can't, what is it? There's all these terms. You can't put lipstick on a pig. You can't polish a turd. You can't do all of these
you can put lipstick things. On a hoggette, though.
You can put lipstick on a hoggette. I think that's the thing with Ernest T. Bass. I don't think Ernest T. Bass. The funny thing about Ernest T. Bass is I did know people like Ernest T. Bass growing up that had that kind of wild mentality, and you didn't know what they were going to do. They were not people I would have set anybody up with. They were people I would keep my distance from.
Yeah, the feral types.
Little feral, little crazy.
Similar to Cocaine Bear.
Today, if Ernest T. was around today, you would be scared of Ernest T. He might be doing time. He might be in and out of jail. And I don't mean the Mayberry jail. I mean prison.
Yep.
And he might have a problem with amphetamines.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, I could be wrong. I don't want to judge, but it's just, this notion that in reality, would Ernest T. Bass just be out for good, clean fun? I mean, I don't think so. I think Ernest T. would be a pretty scary guy.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts?
No, it's good to see you. I hope you enjoy the movie tonight.
Good to see you too. Thanks again. And thanks everybody for listening. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and Podbean, another place you can get your podcast. And wherever anybody else you can find the podcast. And if you think about it, subscribe. Next week, we'll do Prisoner of Love. Until then, Christopher, I wouldn't touch your head with a 10-foot pole.
Prisoner of Love.